Happy Mars Day, Collective. Hope everyone's doing well. It is Tuesday, September 17th, 2024. Just hours away from the Pisces full moon, occurring at 25 degrees of Pisces. Just a few degrees away from Neptune, that's also currently in Pisces. Co-present with Saturn, the great time and taskmaster, the sometimes merciless deliverer of karma, and constraints and limitations. I want to say Saturn is currently at 16 degrees Pisces, so about 9 degrees away from where tonight's full moon partial lunar eclipse is occurring, and it is retrograde like Neptune. So while Neptune is the closest neighbor to this eclipse that we're experiencing, Saturn's presence has definitely been a impossible to ignore one in Pisces since March 7th of 2023. So I wanted to get on here. First of all, if you are subscribed and you're still hanging around, I love you. Thank you. I appreciate you. Welcome back. If you are finding yourself here for the first time, welcome. I'm glad you're here. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd greatly appreciate if you went to the channel page and hit subscribe. Even better if you hit subscribe and like this video and comment on anything that I have said or a question you might have. I really want to encourage more participation because that's really where I like all the great things happen with me personally. In fact, it would be fair to say that the last several weeks, like the better part of the summer, has been an exercise in thrusting myself into spaces that I might not ordinarily find myself, and honestly, just kind of living the astrology, engaging in more conversation with people that I don't know, that are just around, and observing both myself and other people. And I have found a lot of richness that has come from that, despite that very loud, nagging voice that is always sort of pushing me to like have something to show for what you're doing, do something, produce something, and almost get a little check mark in sort of a to-do list format. And that's actually been something I've actively been trying to chip away at a little bit, with the encouragement of Neptune and Saturn in Pisces. Seems a bit of a paradox, but those two energies together have made for very interesting um, opportunities. I don't know about you. I guess in the house that it rules in your chart, it's going to depend. But the energy of Neptune, which is a co-ruler, the traditional ruler of Pisces, and Neptune is Poseidon. It's, the glyph is the trident, and Neptune is the ideals and dreaminess and the romanticism and this sort of blurring of the boundaries element of Pisces, where all the creative potential really is. And then, of course, when you put Saturn in there, it seems like such a jarring difference. Like Saturn wants form and structure and boundaries, and it's like an energy of limitation sometimes. But just like all the energies in astrology, which aren't quite all this or all that, you kind of have to look at the archetypes together, just like separate ingredients of something. Like baking soda is one thing, and then flour is one thing, but then when you put them together, it's like a third thing. So that's kind of what it helps to, I guess, look at a lot of the energies in astrology as. And so when you put Neptune and Saturn together in Pisces, it's it's like a bringing form to the formless. It's taking that creative potential and those ideas that live in your head, um, sort of in that kaleidoscope form. And you're always like kind of shifting and like I'm playing with them and putting them in different forms. And you just think, man, if I could just like put this on the outside, um, you guys don't even know, it would be great. And Saturn, when you bring Saturn in there, well, um, Saturn's like, all right, put your money where your mouth is. And you might find that in periods of history, during Saturn and Pisces transits, especially regardless of Neptune's presence, that's where a lot of great art comes from. Where especially like in the fashion and the sort of the ethereal, the things that are often felt and expressed in nonverbal form. So like fashion and music is a very obvious version. I mean, yes, writing, but it's almost like Pisces, when you put, especially like when you put like Mercury, someone with a Mercury in Pisces, they're often better at expressing themselves through nonverbal means. Like, so their artistic, the expression of what's going on inside, their symbolic expression is not always, but by and large, going to be more focused in the non-verbal sense, versus somebody who has like a lot of strong Gemini, for example, a lot of Gemini placements. Um, they might find themselves excelling at the spoken or written word, as a means of bringing their artistry to life. So I always look back at Saturn and Pisces, and like it's really interesting to look at fashion and music, and even painting. Like sort of especially abstract, like at more abstract forms of expression. So, um, because what else is a piece of art that you create, but bringing form to the formless? And so that's what Saturn encourages us to do. And so, by concentrating on these energies that have already been sort of like with us this year, and now focusing on today, this full moon in Pisces, if you want to get an idea of, I guess, the bookend that it's putting on, maybe a theme for you, go back to March 10th of this year, March 10th of 2024, because that was when we had our new moon in Pisces. It was Pisces 20 degrees ish of Pisces, March 10th. And that's how the lunar cycles work, in case you weren't already familiar. And this is what I like to offer to people who want to get more into like this sort of cyclic aspect of astrology, and as a means of grounding, as a means, like the same way that um, gardeners feel grounded by the cycles of what you do, like the tasks that are for certain times of year based on the natural cycles of the seasons. Um, Astrology has a way of providing that in just like a different way. It's like connecting to the cycles of nature, except you're like looking up as opposed to like looking down. Where, I mean, to be fair, you look at the Farmer's Almanac and it's like a brilliant sort of display of both of the energies that is funny because it's just commonly accepted. You see them all the time. Um, but some people aren't gardeners. Some people don't have space to garden, and some people don't have space in their houses for plants. And so that doesn't mean that you don't feel this sort of like primal urge to ground yourself, especially nowadays, and in this very, very palpable feeling of lots of moving parts around us. Like it's definitely not the time to be looking externally for your sense of grounding or for a constant, because this is like kind of the antithesis of that. I'm sure you've noticed. So um, the lunar cycles are a great place to start, because um, it gives you smaller windows, because the moon moves through all the signs every month, and it's got the very predictable phases that you can track. And it's a good place to start, especially, you'd be forgiven for like having a shorter attention span than you would like living in this era. So I always say, like, start with the lunar cycles, because if you can't follow the cycle of something within a month, then the next best thing, of course, is like the obvious thing, the solar cycle, which most for most of us, it's our birthday. You'd call it your solar return. Um, and if you can't stick with the sun and the moon, the two luminaries, then you ain't ever going to be tracking the transits of Mars, which is about 2 years, and like let alone Jupiter, which is like a 12-year transit, Saturn, which is like 28 to 30 years, and then you get to the outer planets, which are just uh, Uranus, 84 years, Neptune, 164, 165 years from Neptune, I want to say, and Pluto, like 200, just short of 250 years, basically. So start with the moon. It's going to be the most user-friendly one, and I think the most practical for, like, especially when it comes to like navigating your inner world, your emotional world. This is especially true for people that have strong Cancer placements in their chart. So, if you're a Cancer rising, or if you were born in the period of time in the summer, I want to say like June 22nd to like about July 23rd ish, that makes you a Cancer sun. Maybe your moon is in Cancer. Maybe you have significant placements in your fourth house in your chart. All of these things can make you extra sensitive, I would say, to the lunar cycles. So I say all this because here we are at this Pisces full moon, which should feel like a sort of culmination, magnification of something that maybe was ruminating, perhaps like below your conscious awareness, um, from March 10th ish until now. Like, it wouldn't be surprising if you're feeling all this like kind of rawness and like new sort of sensitivity that seemed to come up out of nowhere in these last few days, and even following this eclipse. And that is normal. Like, the whole idea of somatic practice, psychosomatic practice, when it comes to healing, is that your feelings are good intel. Like, you I guess a Cancerian mantra would be, you want to feel your feelings, but you don't want to become your feelings. You want to see them as separate from you, and observe, like, objective observation of your own feelings, as opposed to becoming them, like to where you are one and like you don't know where you begin and they end, vice versa, to where you essentially um, can't have that separateness of self, and therefore they don't really provide valuable intel. They just like take you on this like emotional roller coaster ride that you're just forever trapped in a loop on. So um, you want to observe with compassion. Don't bother inserting a why do I feel like this, or I shouldn't feel like this, or I should, like, that has no use here. You want to observe and see those feelings as useful intel, and then again, with kind of a sense of detachment, and no value judgment, sort of like observing um, why you feel that way, and like sort of pulling the thread there, and maybe seeing what you can come up with, especially if you're somebody who senses that you could use therapy, not so much because you're just in the middle of some crisis. Like, therapy, the benefits of therapy are so vast, and like it's almost like if you're waiting to get into therapy for when your life explodes, um, ask me how I know. It's not ideal. I mean, it's a great time to, but you can get a lot from therapy when it comes to sensing that there's something inside that prevents you from really showing up fully, like from bringing all of who you are everywhere you go. So wholeness, like self-integration. Um, and I think especially it's tricky because if you're somebody who is really good at keeping the ship steady, if you have all the external markers of success, um, it can be hard to rock the boat in any which way. like you would be totally forgiven and it would be totally understandable, because there's probably that narrative in your head, especially if you're from a certain generation, that's like, don't rock the boat. Like, look at how lucky you are. You've got this and that and this, and like, all these ducks are in a row. And just because you don't feel fully aligned, like, and then it's followed by like this sort of self-chastising, so almost in a voice that would be who of you to probably figure out where it comes from. I would argue it's not your voice. Um, Comes from maybe outdated modes of thinking that were more or less imposed or impressed upon you at a very early age. And again, just like you would do for yourself, detecting the sources of those things with compassion and not placing judgment, and then detecting that, okay, this is not mine. This is not a narrative for life that I personally created. And so now I'm going to use my mental faculties. I'm going to decide that that is not my value system. And what is my value system is being a whole person. Just because I have a good job and a nice place to live and this, and that, um, I want more. I want to bring all of me everywhere I am, because I believe that that will only enhance, not only my experience of life, but enhance all the other areas where you are already doing just fine. The irony is that's when that's your the only measure you've known, you might actually be depriving yourself of like what true integration and what true fulfillment feels like, even in all those existing areas of satisfactory, you might say. So I really like astrology as a way. It's been described many times as like a radical self-acceptance. Like you see the wheel, the circle, the sort of blueprint of you, the quality of the moment that you were born, and you sort of like step back, and if you solve it like a problem, like you look at it as like, okay, in a really rudimentary way, you're like, what is the problem of this life, like, or what is the main, it's like a sort of an equation or a riddle or something to solve, because that's kind of what, isn't that what you find yourself at when you're having these moments of existential crisis, like the problem of my life, like what is, how do I bring the essence of this being as depicted in this circle, um, to full self-realization, like to really bringing about the essence of what this moment was, um, into the world. And so I think that's the struggle that a lot of people find themselves in now. And when I bring it back to this lunar cycle, a full moon in Pisces, with all the things I've already said about Neptune and Saturn, is not going to help you evade that essential problem. And I don't say problem as a bad thing. I say problem as in that sort of like existential, like tugging that's going on inside of you, despite all of these sort of superficial markers being there, maybe ones that you had set a long time ago, and you're like, well, I did all the things, and here I am. According to my original calculations, I'm a wild success, and maybe you are. But those feelings are valuable intel, like the feeling of sort of discontentment is not because you're ungrateful. I think we can all, you're probably, if you're watching this, sophisticated enough to detect when you're feeling sort of like petty and just irritable versus like a really strong call that comes from so deep within, to where if you could have put it away or done something else with it, or sort of acted with more gratitude in this direction or that, or volunteered your way out of the feeling or something, you would have, or you would have tried or something. So it's again having a more compassionate view of yourself and the things that you feel, so that you can actually get to the crux of why the feeling is there. So here we are, this full moon, and I have myself, you might say, been doing a lot of all of the same things, sort of like knowing the more methodical way of going about things as applied to me, sort of pretending like I'm doing my chart, like stepping outside of myself and going, what is the advice I would give to me if I were doing a consultation for me? Um, which is it seems obvious, but it's actually not, because I can only see myself through the lens of my experience and who I am. But the best I can come to, the closest thing that I can do to stepping outside of myself, is really looking at my chart and just like detaching, from the ego and just going, what is the problem, so to speak, of this person's life? Like, what is the main call? What are the main proclivities, or like drawbacks or gifts? All of those things, just looking at the whole picture and sort of figuring it out without value judgments. And so that has actually required me to radically do things, like to do things that are deliberately in the other direction of my wiring, which is itself a terrifying series of actions to take. Um, Especially if you have been following this channel from the beginning, and you understand the origins of it and what brought me to create it, namely using the energy of what was destruction, the destroying of everything in my life, and wanting to do something with that energy that was a match to what the energy of destruction is, and that's creation. Um, Once you really start to look at creation and destruction as two different sides of the same coin, you'll realize that in the face of destruction, especially destruction that seems to come external from you, um, it's not going to be enough to sit there and try to hold up like the pieces as they fall, to try to put things back together and like, oh, this piece falls, and to like glue it back in place. You need to respond in kind. And if you don't want to become somebody that you're not, such as creating more destruction, um, you're forced to create something. You're forced to do something of equal weight, to match what has been seemingly imposed upon you energetically. And so I found that once I got to the place of, keeping the ship steady, but also creating with all of this raw energy that could have just eaten away at me. And then things get stable, and then you start solving problems, like the sort of everyday type things, like to where you can get up and not feel like another, shoe's going to drop. Uh, then you really realize like how tricky things can become, because you're still, especially, with me, I realized, so if I go back to March 10th of this year for me, again, you might remember that that was actually, that was one of the most, I would say, I don't know, it's hard to compare, but it was a whole new stage of loss and destruction, because it was not even a month out from losing both of my dogs at the same time. Um, and I was just, that energy is very raw, and I was still sort of in this bewilderment of it all. It was like it had just, that was right after my birthday, like a milestone birthday, and I was just sort of grateful to be above water, but I was under no delusion that like something really profound had happened, and that that weekend that I describe in the video that I did about it, that weekend was itself a new traumatic event that I was very well aware of, was added on to the original traumatic event of the beginning of 2023. And so it was just, uh, it was a very big thing that I knew was added to my plate that I couldn't possibly sit there and appreciate all at once, which was probably like a natural, like sort of coping mechanism. But I also knew like, well, I'm going to have to, the only way out is through. Like, I'm not going to, this is one event that I'm not going to pretend didn't affect me profoundly. It's going to be a lot of work, and we're just going to keep moving forward. And so that's really where I have found myself, is those feelings have been creeping up in the most unusual of ways. And so here I am at the bookend of March 10th, which was very close to when everything, I guess that second big tower. And that was the thing that really came close to, I have to say, just totally destroying me. I mean, I was very well aware at the time that I was in a very delicate balance, and that I knew that I had a lot of work ahead of me. And so there's been like um, a lot of emotions that have come up the last several months, and at times just seemingly like out of nowhere, just sometimes really catching me off guard. But I trusted that they needed to be there. Like, and that can be very frustrating when you feel like you've made so much progress, and in all these other areas of your life, all the check marks. But this feeling that like it would just hit, and like I would just tears would just be pouring out. It would just seemingly come out of nowhere. And an older version of me would have felt really defeated at those moments, like something was wrong with me. But I knew better. I knew that it was actually a mark of progress to sit there and like have compassion for myself, and treat myself the way I would to anyone else in that moment, which would have been looking at what they had been through and going, of course you're bawling. Of course this is a traumatic event that creeps up when, a certain picture pops up like on your iPhone. You'll just be happily going along, and you'll go in your photos and it'll go on this day, and it'll be like, it'll just be gutting. Honestly, it's something that was supposed to be, and it's just a picture of them. And like, especially when it was like less than a year ago, and it just brings me immediately back to the whole bewilderment of how much had changed in my life, and how fast and how quickly I was forced to adapt, while also acknowledging that like I wasn't going to be able to squash the feelings down, that I was going to have to work through them, and like not being overwhelmed at like this sort of Herculean feel to what seemed to be like all these things building up on my plate, that I'm like, man, I'd be lucky if I could get through these emotions like in a lifetime. Um, but again, having compassion and like deciding that, well, I mean, I have to get through it. The time's going to pass anyways. So I can't let these things make me a more diminished version of myself. There has to be value in this level of suffering, I guess. Not to glamorize suffering, like, which is maybe a Neptunian Pisces thing to do. There's no romanticizing suffering. And I think that's where art comes in. It's like you have to sit with it though. Like, it's not going anywhere. You can't pretend it's not there. It has too much raw energy, suffering, and loss and grief, and you have to do something with it. And that's where a lot of the great works of art have really come from, you might say. So I have found that this last few weeks have brought me to this sort of almost this feels more calm. Like, I will say there are moments of feeling a lot more almost, I don't even want to say anxious, just almost like panicked about like the strength of these feelings that were coming up, and wondering how I could possibly channel these um, adequately, how I could match the energy and still keep things stable. And then a really uncomfortable realization started to come when I looked at the energies of Uranus and what it was doing, getting into more complicated astrology going on in my chart. And I realized that the call wasn't to like keep it steady. The call was honestly for like a controlled demolition. And so that's actually what I have been working on, is how to not totally disrupt my life to where I'm creating more problems, but to where I'm actually shaking things up enough to where I am forced to kind of do a final goodbye to pieces of myself that didn't fit into my life anymore. And I think that's where a lot of the feelings, the emotions were coming from. And you might be able to relate to this if you've had significant loss, is especially if you're someone who had like a lot of responsibility at a younger age, and who your actual success in life was based upon your ability to be like a rock, or sort of like the steadfast one, like the stable one. And that serves you well until it doesn't, until your life is you're at this point to where you realize a lot of the parts about you that you're hanging on to were to keep things steady for in my case, my dogs. Like, when I lost, when everything blew up, and the person that I had been engaged to just unceremoniously like blew up our entire lives. And I found out that he was sleeping with his assistant. And it was like night and day. It was one day we were, living together for like the last 20 years, and then the next day he was gone and he never came back. It was that disruptive. And you realize how the person, once you get like your bearings somewhat back, um, and your head stops spinning, you realize that that person had such like a huge advantage, because they were, detaching in advance without, before you knowing it. That's what would be required for someone to actively betray someone that they'd shared a life with for so long. I mean, under any conditions, that would be what would be required of your psyche to do that to somebody. And so once I started to understand that, I realized that like a lot of the pain that remained that I couldn't extract myself from was because I had these two dogs, essentially like our shared children, and they were old dogs. They were old. One of them was blind and like mobility impaired, and it would have been easier to blow up my identity then, when the person I was with did. But I couldn't do that because I had two living things to where um, they already knew that the other person had gone, and I couldn't abandon them too. So, they're just like everyone knows, you can abandon something mentally and emotionally while still physically being there. And I couldn't do that. So I found that my bent for stability and steadfastness, and honestly, even rigidity, because that would be the same energy of stability and steadfastness in its most extreme, really, I leaned heavily on it to, keep my actual life in the 3D world afloat, which included making sure these old dogs had what they needed, and that they got the medical care they needed, and the medications, and like the food, and like the bills being paid, like all the things that were immediately all my responsibility, on top of like this very delicate emotional state. Um, those very Saturnian fixed qualities really came in handy. Um, but then again, when the dogs were gone, it took me a really long time to get to the stage mentally to where I had to stop and like look around at so much of my life and realize that like I don't even know if these are my values anymore. I don't even know if it's important for me to have all of this space. I don't even know if it's important for me to like be in this location. And that doesn't mean I'm not grateful for all these things. I had to really separate myself from that line of thinking, because that was my immediate thing, is to start thinking like, oh my gosh, look how lucky you are, and look how many people would be so glad to have what you have, and this and that. And it's not really a productive mindset, um, because all those things are true, but that had nothing to do with my experience of wholeness in my own life. Like, I'm too young to be somebody that, and arguably, if you're alive, you are too. It doesn't matter what age you are. Um, it should never be to where you just go, well, I've got what I need, and like that little tug on the inside, that's just there's no sense giving any attention to that. And so the recipe for avoiding the fulfillment that you actually deserve, that you might say that the world deserves from you too, because it probably with it comes an expression of something essential about you that the world around you needs. That could, especially at this time in history that we're alive, I think a lot of people are sort of collectively experiencing the call to bring what is essential about them out into the world. And it feels very unnerving because there's a good chance that the way you make your money, during the week, I mean, unless you're lucky, but like there's a pretty good chance that how you make your living is not actually how you bring yourself to being, so to speak. And so I think that presents a unique challenge for a lot of people, which is why going back into the sort of childlike mentality, like that beginner's mind, that sort of art for the sake of art, and childlike joy, like not worrying about if I should, be making money off this piece of art, or if I should, why bother painting if you're not good at painting, and instead just like understanding that there's a value in the expression of things. And so I circle back around talking about these themes because the journey that I've been on, to just do something different with these energies, is I've started just on days to where I feel like my mind's caught in a loop and there's nothing that can be done. Like all the practical tasks are done. To just like get in the car and to go and like walk out in the woods, like walk in nature, preferably somewhere I haven't been, and not overthinking it, and not having this is the amount of time I'm going to be gone, and this is, these are the parameters, like not building parameters in advance where they need not exist, and just thrusting myself into a new situation. And a lot has actually really come from that, because just like, there's no accident that so many of like the greatest writers in history talked a lot about or wrote a lot about like the value of walking, just like walking, not because you want to get to the destination, just for walking, and like looking at the nature around and not having any agenda beyond that, just walk. And I really started to feel like the benefit of movement and sort of giving away whatever things that seemed like were open-ended, just like putting those aside, acknowledging them for what they were, and then just like, well, can't do anything about that now, and go and walk. And what I found was like things that felt blocked would at the strangest times and in the strangest of ways and unforeseen ways just became unblocked. There's no other way to talk about it besides that. And it's actually how I came to like this video. It's actually how I came to figure out how to really talk about this Pisces full moon. Because I just let the sort of weird synchronicities and like sort of things that would pop up that would call me over to this experience, or to this, like watching this or picking up this book that I'd had on the shelf for years, for example, and like not overthinking why this book popping up into my like sort of awareness at this moment, just acting upon that instead of just like overthinking it and shuffling it away, being like, well, I'm gonna get up and I'm gonna pull out the book. And things like really started happening when I did that, in ways that became kind of amusing at a certain point. And so the book I'm talking about is, I have this book, had it for years now. It's called The Book of Yokai. Now, this is a book written by someone named Michael Dylan Foster about the mysterious creatures of Japanese folklore. Okay, so if you know anything about Japanese folklore, uh, there's like the yokai, and then there's the what's called the yurei, and we're going to talk about the yokai. But the yurei, just in case you're interested, the yurei are more so like the ghosts. They're used to describe what we would call ghosts, but sort of like departed, once living things that no longer had like spirit or physical bodies, but that were spirits that were sort of like with unresolved, unfinished business, that kind of thing. But the yokai are, it's an interesting category of things because yokai are they are they're things that are created for where language falls short, and sometimes they are used to describe fears, like commonly shared fears or desires, things in the human experience where words fall short. um, and you might say it's interesting, a really rough sort of parallel, but not irrelevant, would be like meme culture, to where certain memes that become really like images that become really popular is because it seems to tap into this like otherwise like unspoken for thing that is universally experienced, but no one has come up with a face for it, or like a symbol for it or something, or a word. You know, a lot of memes, there's like still no word for it. And so it's like, guy with girlfriend looking back at like girl walking the other way. Like it, but you see the image and everyone knows like what that is. And it's sort of like the dissatisfaction with what you've got. And like, here's this new passing thing. I mean, it's sort of like that. But the yokai culture is it's synonymous with there are a lot of different places where they exist. Uh, but the whole idea of their monster quality is less in like a horror type way and more of like a it's scary because it's uncertain. It's like these little gaps between the zones of certainty, or what we like to call zones of certainty. It's the things that live in the zones of uncertainty. So like there's like certain yokai that have been described as like the sort of in between hours yokai, or the sort of like not quite here and not quite there, but this, or seeming like in this kind of animal, but really it has like the head of this animal and the tail of this and the body of another. It's like it tends to have pieces of recognizable things, but when put together, it's like this whole scary, like weird third thing that we don't know how to describe. And so the Japanese folklore of this, I think they date back to like the Edo period, like from what I remember. But they're very vast. There's like a variety of them, and from the research I was doing, you might say that there's like some, you might use the word interstitial one to describe the zones of uncertainty. Interstitial being like in between. They are repulsive to us because it seems like vaguely like a thing that we're familiar with, but it's not that. Um, in this sort of AI world that we're living in, and like the the expansion of AI, a good way to describe it would be like when you see these like prototypes coming out of robots, and it's like, oh, look at this technology, look at how, you know, this AI lab has like come up with this like uncannily human thing, and you see it and like it's repulsive because it looks a lot like a human. You know, a lot of like the superficial features are there, and it will interact, but there's like this thing that you as a human who is conscious can detect immediately of its non-humanness. And it's almost the fact that it's trying to look human and interacting as if it were is what makes it so repulsive, at least to me. That's, and it's so I ask myself sometimes, like, what is my trigger when I see stuff like that? Because I know it's not some sort of um old man shaking his fist at the sky like, oh, these robots and this technology. Like, I know it's not some sort of attachment to the ways of before. But I trust like that sort of repulsion that I can't ignore. And so when I started researching yokai and the whole concept of it, it really started to make sense to me, because it's like somewhere inside, I almost like, if we're going to do the whole AI thing, then like, let's make it like look like Rosie the robot on the Jetsons. Like, let's just make it look like a robot. The more you try to make it look like a human, to where I'm always going to know it's not, to me, that's the quality of repulsion. And so, a lot of like, the folklore is, when it gets into like, especially animals and like sort of our psyche when it comes to being, how we respond to certain animals. Um, it's our ability to like empathize on some level. So like, for example, with like a snake, there's something just like inherently repulsive about it because it like has no legs. It's like, it moves like so swiftly and quickly, and like when we see something slithering out of a hole in the ground, there's no piece of us as a human that can like empathize with that. um, Even something, the same thing applies with something with too many legs, like when you look at like a centipede, or even spiders. We have trouble, when we can't empathize with something. It's much easier, when it's, a dog or a cat or a deer or something with, you know, four appendages, because that's something that we feel like we can exercise some degree of control over in understanding it. Um, Even a bear, which, there's no, you'd probably be way better off to like encounter a snake and like make a safe getaway than a bear. So it's not even, it's not necessarily a rational thing. It's more so about our ability to empathize in those very, sort of primitive ways, or inability, as the case may be. And so, yokai often falls into that same category. Um, the sort of, when you look at the in between, the hybrid, the liminal, um, the what's ambiguous, the quality of something, that exists in zones of uncertainty. Uh, and in folklore, they tend to really like, which is funny because you might liken it to like when you look at Celtic traditions of like trolls and like, various like woodland creatures that may or may not be like trickster type energy. The yokai tend to be, according to Japanese folklore, they're found in like, um, at like bridges, crossroads, in the shadows, in the sort of like the intersections of places, the not quite here and the not quite there. They're crepuscular, so they're not, diurnal, they're not nocturnal. They are known to, be in the twilight at dusk. That's the time like where the yokai come out and are, I guess, lurking in the shadows. And so that's the thing. It's like, it's where we're not quite at night and we're not quite in the day. It's this like in between stage to where, is it romantic and like sensual and like alluring, or is it dangerous and like, um you better hurry and get home, like a lot of, sort of dystopian horror, movies, or like post fall, like where there's like these zombified creatures. That's always like a really key point, uh, for people to like go ahead and get back inside, finish up your affairs of the day, and go ahead because like dusk is coming. That's where the yokai thrive. So, uh, I was thinking a lot about this whole idea of yokai and, how they seem to pick up, um, these experiences that we have that are very real, but that like where language falls short. And, I started to think about like how that really describes the time that we are living in right now. Um, Either like on an individual level, if you're in a period of transition, it's that sort of discomfort of the unknown. Um, but then as a society, not just here where I am in America, but like in tons of other countries that are in periods of transition to where, we're sort of on this, precipice of like, is this going to be like World War III, or is this going to be like a great new renaissance? And I have to say that, it could go either way. And that's why, I realized that the more you sort of cultivate the mentality of like creation and possibility and potential, and use your thinking faculties to give a name to things that otherwise are just like kind of make you like tense up and just like go through the motions of your day. um, Saying things like the spoken word is really, really powerful. In all the research I've done, and like through folklore and tradition, and even like exploring like Jungian psychology, depth psychology, and like psychotherapy, the whole idea is that by giving a name to something, we've already conquered it. And that's, I really think, where the yokai tradition, like how it evolves, just on a very evolutionary psychology level. And some of them have more playful meanings, like not, it's not always about like really scary periods in life, but sometimes it's like just like something really mundane, like these there's a section in this book where he talks about this exercise, this little experiment a teacher did, where um, they instructed their students to come up with like a yokai, like 20 minutes, come up with a yokai and like describe its features, characteristics, give it a name, whatever. And the students came up with, not surprisingly, the yokai that they created had specifically to do with like experiences commonly shared by students. So one yokai that they came up with was one that like is mischievous and like sort of lingers in the hall and like has a way of manipulating time to make you late for class, even though you're doing everything at the same pace that you normally do. Something to where it's like it just pops up and you're like, oh, I missed the test, I'm late for class. Like, oh, it's this yokai. And then the students came up with this one yokai to where it's like the seat that remains empty on a crowded train, and that it doesn't make sense that it's empty, but like for some reason no one's sitting in it. They came up with like a yokai for that, like this sort of strange thing that like seemed to be occupying that seat, that like everyone seemed to understand. No one sits in that seat, and like tons of people would rather stand up. And so it's like sometimes really simple things like that, but the whole point is that it tends to reflect the commonly shared experiences of the people at that time. And I guess if you really want to know, like, at least in my case, I find that the value of like studying these things, archetypes, you might say, archetypes and symbols, like that's really what these things are. They symbolize something, and like the power of symbolism in the development and evolution of the human psyche um, goes way beyond the scope of this conversation. But it's like sort of this reminder of like, I guess this like common thread. It allows you to empathize with like people from a different time and different walks of life, um, that you ordinarily wouldn't have a way to see from their point of view. And like there can be a lot of value in that, um, especially now, because in this sort of age that we live in with a changing landscape, namely like a digital one, you might find that a lot of the things that like the fears that crept up in people, like at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, where the landscape, it was quite literally like a physical, dramatic shifting of the landscape, the one that we could see. And in our case, it's like sort of the digital landscape, and a sort of de-emphasis on the importance of the physical environment, and like the actual environment, and like nature, and the sort of delicate balance that exists between us and the natural world. um, it's kind of putting us back into that shared state of people who just were used to these like prairie lands and these undeveloped lands, and then all of a sudden they see these like massive like steel skyscrapers. And it's not to like put a value judgment on like, you know, the supremacy of prairie life or the supremacy of city life. It's just observing the human condition with compassion, and finding new symbols to help people put a name on things, and therefore be halfway through like conquering it. And so I think that that's a lot of the research I've been doing, especially in like the origins of astrology and like you know, the symbolism and like the archetypes and stuff and how they came to evolve. You realize how important having a way to externalize the internal shared condition of people helps people advance, like in very significant ways, like as a collective. Like how, it's almost like it only takes a small portion of people really doing that kind of deliberate work and putting these new symbols out. And it's almost like this upload into like the collective consciousness. Like, and so when you live in this digital age, um, that's magnified. It's like I believe in a collective consciousness. I believe that like if you can kind of have a thought in your head, like there's a pretty good chance someone else has had it, and like the difference is who has been able to meet the challenge of bringing it out into the world, to like creating it, to bring form to it so that it can benefit everyone. And that I think is the place that we live in now. And I think the real danger of retreating into our own little digital corners is not because some sort of um, morals that I'm putting on, like, being outside versus being on your phone. Like the reality is we are going to live in an increasingly more digital world, but the reality is we're also constrained by like the material world, and we have to live here. Like this is what we have right now. So, um, and we need each other, and it's good that you can find your online communities. In fact, it's like a really um, effective way to popularize new symbols, like to make meaning in the otherwise these zones of uncertainty that are everywhere, to make meaning and then to like give form to it somehow and to share it with the world. And the internet allows us to do that on a scale like never before seen. So um, but the problem is potentially is if we just are satisfied with like being consumers of what's on the internet versus like co-creators. And you might say that a consumer of the internet and a co-creator of the internet is just the same as like a consumer in general in the physical world and a co-creator in the physical world. If you're somebody that's always taking what other people are creating, you're not participating. You're just a spectator. And it's like you don't have to be an artist or something, but co-creating, I mean, as in participating, um, taking what someone else has done, and then like sort of taking your own walk of life and experience and synthesizing it, and then simply like talking with somebody about it. That is creating. You're creating connection with others, and by you doing that, someone has now taken this creation, your experience and thoughts, and now they have their own life experience, and they've received something that you've put out there, and now they're synthesizing it. And like that's how really the richness and complexity um, of the human condition can really become like create beautiful works of art, but also like meaningful connections, ways of making you feel seen and like a part of something, like making um, you realize that you are part of the whole, and in turn bringing about your own wholeness. Like the more you do that and connect with people, it doesn't have to be that deep, just sort of listening, taking in, reflecting, and then like responding. um, that is There's something being created there always. Like you're always, each moment has a new quality, and you're either part of that quality and making it richer, and like participating in the meaning making of the zones of uncertainty, because just because maybe you have things figured out, or say that you have a firm grasp of something, or you're well studied in something, um, that's something that you have to share with the world. Like, not everyone has your experience and your walk of life and had the benefit of your education or your upbringing or like your skill set. Like, if you worked with your hands on, worked with cars a lot, like growing up, or like worked um, on a farm, or worked like putting like little things together, um, little like sort of working with your hands, tasks in the 3D world that you think that aren't valuable. They are to somebody out there. They are, I promise. Just look no further than like YouTube having like the most random videos of some person from like 15 years ago who's showing you how to like replace the air filters in your house, or something that's you know they didn't get anything from like making that video. They already knew how to do it. But by putting like it out into the world, for posterity, them being of assistance to like the human condition of being constrained by the 3D world where we still need air filters in our houses, that person has achieved like a degree of immortality, you might say. So when you look at things like that, in that moment, it was just like an ordinary day, and some guy like who doesn't care about the theatrics or the production value or quality of the video camera he was using, he, in his mind, probably just very practically thought, not everyone knows how to do this, and one day someone might need to look it up. And a lot of times those are the videos that have like the most hits. Like, some person with like 2 followers on YouTube that has only posted like 8 videos total can have like one of the most valuable, like regularly sought after things about how to navigate some, sort of ordinary part of life. So when I talk about co-creation, and bringing what is essential about you out into the world, I'm not just talking about, some like artistic talent you have. Of course, that can be a part of it. But if you're really good at explaining things, and like you're really good at mastering information quickly, and you regularly find yourself looking around and going, oh, why is this so hard for everyone? Well, I saw this thing semi recently that said, like, if you have trouble figuring out what your talent is, look no further than like, what do you find that is just so, when you look around, seems so mysteriously difficult to everyone, and it just bewilders you? That there's something there, because instead of like looking at it as sort of like throwing your hands up in the air, like, oh, nobody knows how to do this, instead like flip it around and be like, I think I might be uniquely good at finding information, synthesizing it, and then like putting it in action. That's not one, and it can be hard to miss those things, because that probably just means, when you boil it down, that you're resourceful. You can get to the crux of something quickly upon scanning like the relevant information, and then you can put it into simple steps. And even better if you're able to communicate that. And that's the thing, that is a skill, and it deserves to be shared with the world, because that is part of what makes you you, but it's also you connecting to others, and participating in meaning making in ways that go beyond your ability to see. So I talk about monsters and uncertainty and all of these things, because in this world, to where there is sort of like a corner of the internet for every fear, every desire, every yearn for distraction of a certain type, um, there's nothing wrong with like sitting down and going like, okay, I need a distraction. And like, we all do that, whether it's watching a movie, or scrolling on the internet, or reading a magazine, whatever. But it needs to be balanced with like, what are you putting out there? What are you extending of yourself into the world? Even if it's not on the internet, like to just like your own community, like the circle, the network with, you're probably part of a lot of networks. And maybe you, I mean, I can relate. You have a lot of things, like a rich world in your head, and you just have trouble expressing things verbally, or you overthink and you just assume nobody cares about this. whatever. Maybe they don't. I don't know. Well, that's fine. Put it out there anyway. Put something out there because sometimes people need to hear it. And sometimes I find that when you do that, especially the more benign the thing, sometimes it can reach somebody who needed to um, be considered uh, at that moment. And sometimes that just means like sending someone a text, like, and saying, hey, I don't know why I thought of this, but like, I just did this and I thought you would appreciate it. I do that a lot. It's often about like the silliest, stupidest, most mundane things. And I used to overthink those moments and go, oh, well, they're probably busy. Well, maybe they are. The whole point isn't for me to like have a distraction so they'll talk to me. It's like there's value in letting someone know that they crossed my mind, or something crossed my mind, and I thought of this person or this group of people, um, and thought someone in this group would appreciate it, and being okay with if maybe it doesn't land with anybody, but still in all they can see it as me thinking of them, me considering them. And sometimes it's just that simple, is just letting people know that you considered them. And that can take people a really long way in their own periods of uncertainty, their own zones of uncertainty, where your mind can do really tricky things. Don't forget that Jupiter is in Gemini right now. It's going to be until next summer. And Jupiter, which is expansive, when you put it in Gemini, which is already like TikTok energy, I like to say it's fast and it's mercurial. It's good for dabbling and like spreading yourself, sort of the putting your hand in all these things and like not staying long enough to master any one thing. That can be fun, um, but then it can quickly become your mind stuck in loops. Like, what's going to happen when there's no new input or things aren't fun and exciting, and you're just in a day where it's not quite great, it's not quite bad, it's just there. Jupiter and Gemini can become a very destructive, unproductive thought loop, and it will often be things that were ingrained in childhood. Like, it will be often self-defeating talk, and you don't know where it's coming from. So sometimes when you send somebody a little thing, like a silly thing, it can snap them out of those thought loops, and it can just remind them that every moment has the potential for co-creating. Every moment is like um, this sort of cosmic stew of energies that are sometimes working for you and sometimes not so beneficial to wherever you're at, but that each moment has a different quality, and that at any point you can maybe participate in changing the quality of it for yourself in that moment. So, someone shoots you a text and it's silly, all you have to do is pick up your phone and like look at it, and sometimes I can snap you out of wherever you are, and you'll just like come out of the thought loop, and you'll be like, you know what, all right, I'm just gonna thrust myself into this activity, or I'm just gonna like leave the house and go walk in this park, because I know that it's better to just walk in a circle outside among beautiful things for an hour than to sit and have my mind loop around unproductive things in this environment and have nothing to show for it. So I encourage everybody to kind of sit there with the idea of yokai. And I wrote down, actually, as a little thought exercise, what yokai can you give form to in your life so as to claim ownership of and um, integrate it in an effort to move closer to wholeness, sort of, instead of having those little moments like describing what I just said, the in between hours where it's like your mind goes on the like automatic default thought loop, and it's like not quite enough time to go and run these errands, but it's still enough time to get caught in the loop and to sit here and like feel like you're deteriorating in your own thoughts for an hour. Is there something else can we name that? Can we like give it a yokai and be like, oh well, this is this yokai, it's not me, but it's like it lives with me. You invite him in, you acknowledge it, And then you go like, all right, yokai, let's like go out to the park. Let's start texting this friend. Let's send a voice memo to this friend I haven't talked to in a minute and be like, yeah, you remember that time? Do things like that that feel like they're yanking you out of those patterns. And it starts like those little things start to build up on one another. And the only way to do that, though, is to like give the thing a name. You have to give it a yokai, if you will. Um, I put it on here too, and a little note about Jupiter in Gemini, the energy of Jupiter, expansiveness, um, meeting the mercurial playfulness of Gemini. And like Gemini is all about duality. It's not, that's often why Gemini frustrates people, because they kind of refuse by their nature, or the energy of Gemini, which we all have, um, more pronounced in one area of life than in the other. Your chart will tell you that, is it refuses to be like all this or all that. It's both and energies, which is playful energy. So if you really look at like what expansiveness plus mercurial playfulness would be really good for when channeled deliberately, creating like these imaginary creatures or symbols for otherwise uh, sort of nebulous things that are very real. Like they're very real in terms of your experience of them, but they don't have names. They don't have words that could adequately describe them. You're participating in meaning making with those little in between stages. So um, it's uniquely suited for not only creation of those things, but communication of those things. Like make up a nonsense word. If you're really good at drawing symbols or like little characters, even better. Um, and almost detecting these like zones in your life that seem like they have like some sort of power over you, or keep you trapped in these loops of like thought or behavior, and give them names. And like you'd be surprised at what happens when you detect those things about yourself with compassion, just objective observation, um, and just see what happens. Like don't make it deep. Don't make it like, okay, what has to happen with these? Like, now what do I do? What's the next course of action? Just start with like this sort of playful, detached approach. Like, how can I make this? How can I combine all of the goals of like yanking myself out of like unproductive loops, creativity, communication, and co-creating, and sort of snapping me into a different reality in a moment that could otherwise just keep being on loop in my life. And give it a try. You might as well. It serves as a distraction from the other distractions that you have that probably don't make you feel like any more whole, I would guess, especially if they're like social media or other sort of less productive distractions. Um, and I also had this sort of thought about the nature of immediate gratification when I go to social media and I'm thinking about Saturn. And I've done a video before on Saturn, and it being like it rules time and like delayed gratification, karma, in the sense that karma is just the natural consequence of action or inaction over a certain period of time, right? And I started thinking about like what the nature of our yokai in a collective sense would be. And I couldn't help but like see the theme of Saturn in Pisces there, because it's almost like having these like immediate refresh feeds, like being on social media and like getting used to these being our sort of like moments to where we detach from like our work and we refresh our feed, and like there's always a new variety of things to pop up, and you could scroll endlessly forever doing that. And how you can feel physiologically, if you really observe yourself, that irritation. Like there's just like this irritability that comes when you click off of it, when you have to like stop that and like attune to like a more normal pace in the 3D world. There's like this lingering irritability um, that's very frustrating if you ever sit and observe it, because like you could have not seen anything that was um, easily identifiable as annoying or irritable, but yet the pace of things that you've had the shift from like instant, instant, instant. Towards Saturn. What in the world is Saturn? There's no boundaries. There's nothing. There's no boundaries here. I can see whatever, have whatever. I can go to DoorDash and I can even like give into this food craving of something I saw in my timeline. I can go to this app and click it and then it can be delivered. There seems to be like an elimination of Saturn as just a natural energy to modern life. And I can't help but think that there's something there. Like there's something about how much of our discomfort and like the fear now putting us in that sort of jungle, like that primitive state of fear, how much of that is attached to like just patience, like just the natural unfoldment of things as they would unfold in the ordinary course of someone's life and personal evolution. How much of that has become like this monster for us? And I mean, this is purely anecdotal about like just observing myself and like when I'm like, why do I feel this? Like, why do I feel anxious? And I'm realizing, like, oh, that's just because I've kind of shifted here and I'm building something. And like, I want to know when it's going to work out. I want to know when I'm just going to sit there and be like, look, I made it. And I realized that that's been something that's existed since the beginning of time. Like, anytime somebody tries something new, anytime someone creates something, anytime somebody starts a new relationship and you're like, oh, I'm anxious. Like, this is so good. I want to make sure I know that it's going to work out forever, which is insane and is a good recipe for self-sabotage, I would say, but you can carry that mentality into so many areas of life now that you ordinarily wouldn't have felt that sort of like pressing anxiety simply because the phone world that we hold in our hands allow we don't have those constraints like um, I can go on a dating app and like I could immediately feel like look at all this potential I've got in the world and it's like well I mean yes and no I mean unless you actually meaningfully select and like put the time into considering in the traditional ways, is this person a good match, is this like somebody who's looking for a long-term thing, will this make me feel fulfilled in the long run, and then you actually have to go out into the physical world and then be patient with somebody, like all the same constraints for the unfoldment of something that has staying power still exist, but yet the danger, and this is like I guess where my soapbox on dating apps comes from, not because like I'm above them or like some again like old fart mentality. It's about like I think that the pace and like the sort of parts of our brain that get rewards from the interface of it, um, those still don't really eliminate the whole process of patience itself and the discomfort from the zone of uncertainty. Like it is a zone of uncertainty from the moment you agree to that first meeting with someone and every step of the way along the way. But your brain is sort of on the pace of of an app of any sort, where you can scroll and click and yes and no and swipe left, swipe right, whatever. And that is like sort of a mismatch for the pace of unfoldment of building anything that lasts in the world, especially like with someone else. So um, I was just kind of like that popped into my head. Sort of about the whole concepts of limitations, consequences, aging, especially being subject to just time. I mean, you're just sort of bombarded when you go online, especially women, with targeted ads that are meant to make you think about the fact that, like, hey, you're someone who is getting older, whoever you are, like, you probably need these products and this. And everything is meant to make you feel like you see Saturn, like time. No, that's not like a problem for you. And I don't know. I just think that a lot of like the dissatisfaction and fears now that we have are like directly a result of like um, thinking that we can evade like the laws of time. And I don't know, maybe think about that and how it applies to your own life, how maybe your zones of uncertainty could they be looked at as actually just like perfectly normal, um, areas where patience is needed, and like to where just the slow and steady wins the race sort of mantra. It's annoying because like there's an app for that, or hey, not for you. You can like click, 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 and then boom, you've got this. Um, but I find that like, especially in a birth chart, you can see this, and in relationships, the ending seems to always inevitably be baked into the beginning. That's what I find. So um, it's helped me as a coping matter, actually, looking at a lot of instances in my own life, and like instead of thinking too long about why someone did this to me and why they went on and did this, like it was something like, I realized that all the time that you spend thinking about those things is robbing you of thinking about your own life and your own progress and potential for growth. But also, because of my real firm belief in this energetic principle itself of time and the nature of something, its essence being the quality of that moment it was born, and that will include like the quickness with which the impulsivity within which you pursue something, a relationship, a job, like a new life, a new identity, a new whatever. The impulsivity and desire and need for immediate gratification, you don't want that baked into something that you want to last for yourself. And that's where I'll leave this, because the trade-off, of course, is discomfort. Everyone has to have the zone of uncertainty um, for all the things that come with Saturn's rewards, the delayed gratification. Those are the things that last. So if you find yourself feeling uncertain, especially the Neptune energy, like Neptune, I want to say it's like at 28 degrees of Pisces, and this full moon is occurring at 25 degrees of Pisces. So there's a lot of like uh, a lot of sort of fog around things. Like, so the emotions that are coming up, which are definitely going to be magnified. I'm not saying they're bad or they're good or whatever. They just are. Like, just know that whatever is feeling sort of in the Piscean waters, to where you're like can't get a clear view, and you just sort of want this. You want someone to give you a yes or no or whatever. Just kind of release that. Just, it will pass though. That something that astrology does do for us, and I tell people all the time, is when you're going through this transit that feels, the ick of it is the sort of like nebulousness, like it's like murky. um, it will pass. It's here and then it's gone. And for some transits, it takes a little bit longer, especially for those outer planets, like the Pluto transits, the Uranus transits, the Neptune transits, the Saturn transits. You'll notice them, but like you will get through them because they will pass. And the only way to, I guess, sabotage yourself is to like fighting against the natural current that you already feel um, is present in your life. So with that being said, um, I honestly can't remember if I said this at the beginning of the video. I meant to. If you have messaged me about a follow-up consultation, um, I'm gonna get to you. I haven't forgotten about you. I've been getting to messages one by one, whether it's like a Facebook message or an email. I'm pleased to have people reaching back out that I've done an initial consultation for, who want like sort of a more a follow-up consultation on a specific area of life. And if you are reaching out to me for the first time, make sure, if someone referred you, please make sure to give their name so that they can get credit for the referral, because I have a program to where if you have five, so whether it's like you've gifted someone a consult or you yourself have had more than one, if you yourself are responsible for five bookings with me, whether for yourself and for another, you get a free 1 hour consult of for whatever you want. Whether it's like you could do like a area of life consult, you could do a something specifically geared towards like one of your signs, like a specific like outer planet sort of transit consult, like what are the current transits going on in my life right now. Let's unpack these, especially in light of this thing in my life. I do now secondary or your secondary progressions, which is a whole other area that I've expanded in that I've really, really enjoyed applying, um, finding a lot of value in that. So secondary progressions, consults, um, all kinds of things. But more than anything, the initial consult, I think, is a really good place to start. Maybe you've had a consult with someone in the past and you just want an hour consult. You're like, hey, I've had my chart done before. I know that these are my big three. Can you like spend some time explaining just like a broader framework for me in general? Like, I find that there's sort of this missing middle when it comes to a lot of astrologers, like really knowledgeable ones, talk like way over people's heads. And I mean, I know I still do that sometimes, but I really try to like stay in the shallow end so that people can get used to, like, because it is a language, it's like its own symbolic language of that sort of commonly shared human experiences that our ordinary words don't really cover. So what I'm going to do in this video, after a lot of thought, I have been operating on just sort of a word of mouth consult basis, but I am going to provide in the description of this video my professional email address that you can contact me if you would like a consult of any sort. I do digital, like, remote video consults. I've done it before. I prefer in person. So if you're in Central North Carolina area, um, reach out to me for the possibility of meeting up for a personal consult. But if you are somewhere else and are interested in like a virtual consult, I can do that as well. So I'll provide the email address. It's moonflowercollectivebookings@gmail.com. Look in the description box for that. And I think that's it for now. Again, I want to thank you for tuning in. And I forgot to share here, this is my this is the moon card, since we're in our full moon energy. This though is the my new favorite deck. It's the Quantum Tarot. I just love this. This is the deck, Quantum Tarot. I don't know if you can see it, but zoom in on the video if you want. And the moon card in this is really, really beautiful, but it's a really Piscean, very much fits the vibe of like the Neptune conjunct the full moon. And I'll read the little description of the moon card in this book. I think it's really fitting. And it describes the moon in the Quantum Tarot as extra dimensions. The moon represents dreams, visions, and hallucinations, the strange, frightening realm beneath the conscious mind. What fearful mystery are you drawn to explore? Might say, what yokai are lurking in the corners of your life that you can give a name to? Oh, hope this was helpful. Thanks again for tuning in, and take care. Till next time.